Good day, ladies. This is just a review of markets, the part that we've already discussed with regard to demand. Just in case there are some of you that are still confused about the role of demand and understanding all the facets that are involved. So, let's go back to the beginning where we discussed what demand was. You're all very familiar with that. It's the quantity of the particular good or service that consumers are willing and able to purchase at the various price levels. And the graph for it looks like this because each point along this line represents a different price and the number of units that will move at that price. So at $20, you've got 200 units of shoes in demand. At $40, it's about 160. At $60, 120. And at $80, 80 units. $100, 40 units. Now, this is sloping downwards because, as we all know, the law of demand states that as prices increase, moving up this way, the quantity demanded is moving back. So, as price goes up, quantity moves back. At $20, 200, $40, 160, $60, 120, $80, 80, $100, 40 units. So that is why it is downward sloping. And that is what is stated here in the law of demand, that as the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded will decrease. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to this, and they are going to be things like luxury items and vintage cars. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is later in this topic. And remember that we are actually discussing market demand, not so much individual demand. That we're talking about the market for a particular good, so the demand by all consumers for that particular good or service. So remembering with the demand graph that price is always on your y-axis and quantity is always on your x-axis. There are going to be a number of things that affect the demand for a product, and I like to use the acronym PIPPET, so puppet with an I instead of a U. So price, which we looked at already, price goes up, demand comes down, price goes down, demand goes up. The income of the consumers in question. Obviously, the more money consumers are earning, the more they'll be able to buy of a product. The less money they earn, the less they can buy. Population also has an impact because of the size of the population. Like, why can you sell 5 million products in a country like the US but only sell 1 million here? Well, it's very different when you're dealing with a country that has 300 million people as opposed to a country that only has 23 million people. And in terms of age distribution in your population, if you're in a country where there are, I don't know, say 12 million people over the age of 60 and your service is aged care, the quantity that you can sell is going to be much larger than a country where there's only 2 million people over the age of 60. And obviously both of those numbers are fictitious. The next thing that's going to affect demand are the price of substitutes and complements. And we've already discussed the difference between those two items. Substitutes are things that can be bought instead of the product you're looking at. So if I'm going out for a drink with my friends at night and my choices are coffee and tea, there's substitutes. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes I buy both, but generally tea and coffee would be considered substitutes for each other. You also have substitutes in terms of brands, don't forget. So I'm going to buy a TV, I have a choice between a Sanyo and a Sony, or, let's not forget LG. Complements are things that have to be purchased together. Now, if okay, so I'm buying, let's say, a DVD player. I'm also going to need DVDs. I'm not going to just buy DVDs if I do not have a DVD player. Now, I know that I can play DVDs on my laptop and my PC and all those kind of things, but generally, you wouldn't find a person purchasing DVDs if they don't own a player. Now, if players are really expensive, then the demand for actual DVDs are going to be affected. There's also future prices. And this can happen with a number of things where people think, oh, the price of these particular items are going to go up, I better buy a lot now. Or the price of this particular item is going to go down, so I'm going to wait until they're discounted. And that can happen a lot with clothing, especially with, each new season. Some people, depending on, and see, that's about personal tastes and preferences as well. Some people want to buy it in peak season. Some people know that it's going to be discounted in a few months and they'll wait. So they can sometimes be related, these two items. But tastes and preferences of consumers also a huge impact on demand. If something is the in thing at the moment, then demand for that product is going to go up, or increase. If there's been some bad press, or there's been some kind of issue and a particular item is now out of favor, then demand will decrease. The important thing to remember, though, and I'm not sure that all of you understood this, understood how important this is. Of all of these factors, the only things that can move the demand curve completely are these items here. All of the non-price related items. Because the price of the good itself doesn't move the whole curve. It just moves along the curve. But we'll look at that on the next couple of slides. So as I was saying, ladies, the only factor that can move demand along the curve is the price of the item itself, because it's already graphed here. So this can only move up or down, okay? Now, in terms of up, I'm being lazy with that terminology. I really mean contract. So as the price is going up, demand is contracting here. So we're going from this quantity at this price to this quantity at this price. And that is a contraction. We don't say demand has decreased. We say demand has contracted. The price of the item has gone up. So now consumers are demanding less of that item. Now, if we started here at this original price, this quantity was demanded, the price moves down from here to here, and in accordance along this graph, we've now moved down, well, really up, out to this quantity, which is much more than was in demand previously. So demand has expanded, not increased, but expanded. So what I like to refer to these as, I guess, the geography teacher in me likes to refer to these movements as a northwest movement and a southeast movement. So when price goes up, we go northwest and contract. When price goes down, we go southeast and expand. So, and over here, that's basically explaining what I've just said. So contraction in demand creates a northwest movement. The price of the good has risen. The quantity demanded has fallen. That is a contraction. We've moved from Q1P1 to Q1P or Q2P2. So Q2P2, Q1P1. We've moved up. The expansion, the southeast movement that I was talking about, price of the good has dropped, and we've gone from here to here. So if we go back to our factors of demand, we've looked at what the price factor does, how it moves along the curve as opposed to movement of the curve. Now let's have a look at how these other things are going to affect our demand curve. So if we look at the shifts of the demand curve, first thing is when there's an increase in demand, the demand curve moves to the right. So D1 has moved out to D2. And the factors that can cause an increase in the quantity demanded, all of those other things that we talked about, but now specified towards what would cause the increase. Remember, all of the non-price factors. So now we're looking at how these items over here have changed demand. So, for example, a population has increased, so there are more items now in demand. Demand curve moves to the right. Income levels of consumers have increased. So again, more in demand because they can afford more. Demand moves to the right. There is a shift. Demand increases. The price of the substitute has gone up. So consumers are now demanding more of this particular item. So demand curve shifts to the right. Demand has increased. The price of the complement has come down. So people are more willing to buy the original. I like to look at printers and ink cartridges, or I guess laser printers and toners, because a lot of people don't, I guess some people can forget that the price of the toner or the ink cartridge is just as important as the price of the printer you're looking at as well. I remember there was a time where all of a sudden all these inkjet printers were reduced to like $40 and $50, but the cartridges, the ink for them, was around the same price. It was still $50 for the ink. So I know people who were just buying a new printer instead of buying ink to refill that printer. So that's just an example of how the price of the complement can affect the demand for the good itself. Also, expected future prices that can impact. So let's say people expect the future price to increase, then they will buy more now. Demand increases now from D1 to D2. Tastes and consumer preferences for the good or service goes up. So all of a sudden, it's the in thing. Everyone's in favor of it. It's the thing to be buying and to see, to be seen owning. So everyone will buy more of it. It is in more higher demand, and demand increases. The demand curve moves to the right. So the overall impact that has really happened is that at Q1, at P1 over here, on the original demand curve, the quantity demanded was Q1. Now, the quantity demanded, this particular quantity demanded, is the same, but at a higher price. Because this demand curve really no longer exists. We're looking at this demand curve as the new demand curve representing that product. And once upon a time, this many units would have moved at this price, But now this many units